As always, muted. Okay. How are you all doing? Hope that you are ready for another Scrum Wednesday. Okay, we're slowly populating. Welcome, Luka. Okay, people are still joining in. Welcome. Okay, so good evening all, and today I'm joining in from lovely city of Tuzla, and it's a pleasure to be here. So welcome to another Scrum Sredom or Scrum Wednesdays. Pleasure to have you all here. Tonight we'll be talking about topic that many of you expressed some interest about. It's the Agile Leadership. And with us, we have Manoj Khanna, who is a senior consultant and somebody with a lot of mileage on both leadership and leadership consultancy. A man behind Sentio, training provider and consultancy agency. So I know of no better person to deal with this topic in this moment. So Manoj, feel free to start anytime you want.
Right, thank you, Bogdan. Dobro veče, everyone. Hopefully, is my voice clear? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes, all good.
All right. Cool. All right. So thank you for the introduction, Bogdan. I'm gonna share my screen if you guys can see it. If I'm speaking too fast, please let me know. I will talk slowly. Give me a second. Share my screen. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. So I don't have too many slides, but I do have a lot to talk about. But at the same time, we also have like two different exercises or activities which we can do on, or which we should do at least, given the subject and the topic, on Jamboard. Okay, so I'll share those links once we are ready. Looking at so the topic today is talking about the agile leadership and inspiring greatness, right? So from my perspective, when we talk about agility and leadership, we are typically talking about how we can build a capability for building the next generation of an agile organization. And it is not up to the organizations, but it is actually up to the people who actually are either running the organization or part of the organization, and how they are actually collaboratively working together and empowering their own teams and bringing the different aspects of agility within the organization and then taking it forward, right? So it has a lot to do with the idea of you know uh, the agility concept in the last few years, which we have seen, right? And it is very quickly becoming a topic of such an importance between the senior management and and the leadership teams, right? So more so now, because now we are living in a time and an era of of this big pandemic, as well as how it is affecting the organizations, right? And also more so because now we are in our fourth and coming into very fast the fifth generation of industrial revolution. And the social changes are rapidly happening, and we are seeing that technology is moving onwards and upwards, faster than we expected. And we are at a tipping point where we are seeing the companies are actually looking to be more agile, right? And they are looking to be more competitive. They are looking to be more focused on an area where they have to either survive or actually have to thrive, right? There are only two ways to look at those facts within a company. Now, in a technology rich company or in any sort of company, it is becoming very, very important to look at how this tipping point can be addressed, right? And how those companies can get to the next level, right? And the pace of these changes is actually completely looking at from a reality point of view, that how the private, the public, and the other aspects of social aspects of the organization, and the working around that is actually to be caught up. So looking at that, when we talk about the story of agility in general, we have two different kinds of organizations now. One is a traditional organization, and the other one is an agile organization. And from an agility standpoint, when we are talking about, there's something new, which is not very new, but has been a newer concept that has been talked about in the last couple of years, and that is VUCA. That's called VUCA. I don't know how many have heard of it. But if you look at a traditional organization, so what is a traditional organization, right? And how different it is from a model which is more traditional to nature. And when we look at the traditional organization, they primarily evolved and with some level of stability, right? And where they're assuming that the world is predictable, right? And it is based on the idea that organization as a machine is working, you know, uh, in a very well oiled machine, and it tends to basically favor a sort of a hierarchical structure, and which is operating through basically planning and controlling to execute things, and very very low level of variation in the business model. Now, as we see that the things have actually changed in the last 40-50 years, and we are living in a world today which we call as VUCA world. So VUCA stands for, V stands for volatile, U stands for unpredictable, C stands for complexity, and A stands for ambiguous. So we are living in a world which is very volatile. It's very uncertain and unpredictable. It's very complex, and it's very ambiguous, right? Which leads to a certain situations that the matrix-like organizations, the rules which are around those organizations, and the controlling aspect is something which the companies and the organizations struggle with, right? And they are sort of companies who are traditional in management, traditional in organization, and not really agile. They typically struggle with this issue. And what happens is typically that there are signs that they either struggle or they just fade away. And they also pay a severe penalties in order to not making those changes and making and happening those changes. So the good examples we can see in the industry today in the last 15-20 years are Nokia, BlackBerry, and Kodak and Motorola. So these are some big example of companies who actually were very traditional organization. They thought that they are the top of their game in the market, right? But they didn't really quite understand the complexities of the VUCA world, and neither they prepared themselves to such a such a fate. And when we look at the agile organizations, right? So when we talk about agile organizations, we're talking about organizations which are living and breathing, right? And they have evolved themselves in an environment where they are becoming, where they have become very unpredictable. They are working and operating in a very rapidly changing environment. And typically we consider that agile organizations are actually both stable and they are also very dynamic, right? They are focusing on customers, they are focusing on feedback, they are focusing on the regulations, right? And within the workings of their own internal workings and the processes, they are very open, they are very inclusive, and they don't have sort of hierarchies to deal with. And they're continually evolving, and they are becoming sort of a learning organization. I don't know if anyone of you have read the book called The Fifth Discipline, which is from Peter Senge. If you get a chance, you should definitely read that book. So in in fifth discipline, Peter Senge talks about, building a learning organization, and that part of building the learning organization comes from in the inside of the organization itself, which comes through the people. And looking at also again the agile organizations, we are looking at how they are also embracing the uncertainty, which is part of the VUCA world, and the ambiguity, right, with a lot more confidence, right? And typically we say that if it is an agile organization, they are more prepared and they are better equipped to handle the future, right? Any questions so far?
Feel free to drop comments or just to join in at any time.
All right, sorry.
To know.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Somebody liked the picture. All right, so there are certain aspects within the organization itself that within the Agile organization itself that we look at typically, and we talk about that the Agile organizations are following a certain set of practices, right? And when we talk about certain set of practices, we are typically talking about what do they exactly do and how they actually become agile. So, and when we look at agile organizations as one of the set of practices that they follow, is basically they focus on value creation and how the value is created, right? First of all, they find out like why they are creating, who they are creating the value for, and how they will be creating the value for. In most cases, it's a customer, right? They are very, very obsessively focused on solving customer problems, and they are committed to creating value with either a wide range of people who are involved, such as stakeholders, which includes the customer itself, the people who are involved in the company, employees of the company, and partners within the company, and the communities that they're serving, right? So the whole practice of having to create who they can create this value for and how they can create the value is very important and embedded within those agile organizations. The second set of practices which they have typically is about the small and empowered teams, right? So they actually build a network of small and empowered teams. So I don't know, when you actually are working in your typical agile kind of targeted organization, you are typically looking at there are multiple teams, there are different scrum teams or kanban teams or whatever teams that you have. Those are sort of an example for small and empowered teams, right? So what those small empowered teams give, they actually give you a backbone and a structure, right? And they replace the traditional hierarchy with a flexibility of the workings within the organization. They actually also bring in a scalable network of teams. Like we start with small teams, then we scale it up to do bigger things with bigger teams or a bunch of other teams which can be scaled to a point where we are solving bigger problems, right? So the idea of small and empowered teams and creating the network of those is very important within an agile organization. Then we talk about how an agile organization use the rapid decision making and build a learning cycle, right? So they typically work in rapid cycles of thinking and doing, right? So either you can call them sprints, you can call them iterations, but what they do is typically they break down a large piece of problem into smaller chunks of packages or backlog items, right? And they execute in short and focused bursts. So if you're trying to solve a bigger problem within an organization, you cannot really solve it unless only you break it down into smaller little pieces and have the teams focus and give their full attention towards something that is going to get resolved over a short burst period of time in smaller packages, right? And this helps in sort of recalibrating based on the goals and the metrics, right? So one things I typically talk about, I don't know how many of you heard of OKRs. Anyone? Oh, we got one answer.
We are getting thumbs up.
Oh, we're getting thumbs up. All right. I don't see thumbs up. That's great. So OKRs typically are, they are objective key results. And typically when we are working through the objective and keys and results, we are looking at how we actually make sure that we are tracking our goals. We are setting objectives with key activities that need to be performed with the expected results or outcomes, right? So again, the point being with the OKRs is you're focused on the outcomes, not on the outputs, right? So that's something which organizations, typically look at. Agile organizations typically look at from that perspective. The the other point about being an agile organization, or one of the practices that they follow, is around having a dynamic people model, which is igniting passion within people who are working for the organization, right? So what it typically means, and it's directly related to the culture uh, and the leadership, right? And what typical agile organizations do is basically they put the people at the heart of culture and leadership. They engage and empower everyone within the organization to create value, which can be created rapidly and quickly. Bring a culture of collaboration, right? And through that, and through the use of OKRs and whatever methods they want to use in order to measure the goals and metrics, they want to make sure that they actually are more effective. So, any questions so far? I mean, the way I'm structuring this is basically I would like to see if we can, go through the Q&A with each and every slide so that we don't have to wait till the end, because there's no surprise in the end. All the surprises are in each slide.
Okay. So, but okay. So, if I may drop a question here, there is always a cost of transition to agile.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that typical first buy-in? And okay, the companies are now getting to the point where it's almost evolutionary for them to survive by adaptation, but where do you get the metrics there, like agile versus non-agile? What can you put on paper to convince them? I'm not talking of general reports, but for particular examples.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one thing to understand before we go into the answering of this question, companies look at differently, agile differently, right? There is no standard definition of agility, right? And there is no specific scale to measure how agile a certain company or an organization is. And that's actually a fact, because every company you ask, their measurement of agility is very different than the other company, right? Some companies might be, organization might be agile based on having to run like maybe 10, 15 teams, and delivering the outcomes based on releases that they're doing, or the business values that they're delivering, or getting the output of. For some companies, it might be not enough, right? They might be in a more in-depth uh, change process of processes, the management, and the culture of the company, right? So the definition of agility is a little skewed for different companies. The metrics of agility is skewed for different companies. It's not really a standardized way of measuring it. The best way to measure is basically within the organization itself, what do they think agility stands for them, and how they think that they will measure their progress based on the outcomes that the teams and their own people that they are bringing into the organization. Now, there's another definition which is there's another factor which is important here. There are two things which we typically talk about. One is a flexibility, and the other one is adaptability. And if we are talking about flexibility, you can have a flexibility within one system within the organization, but you cannot have a flexibility for the entire organization, because the entire organization typically is pretty big. And there we talk more about the adaptability. So when we are talking about the agility within the organization, and within the leadership, we are typically focused on the adaptability. And also there's another word I'll throw in here, is basically two words: sense and responding, right? Sensing and responding. Now, within the organization, when we are talking about flexibility, you can predict the flexibility, you can make some changes within the system, what sort of uh, leeway you need in order to wiggle yourself and create a room to wiggle yourself in that situation. But when it comes to the organization, the adaptation, collaboration, sensing, and responding are the key measures. So if you are talking to the senior leadership who really doesn't understand what agility is, I would start with talking about the outcomes, the value creation, right? And much larger things that they truly understand from a business perspective, rather than focusing on the aspects of agility and what agility brings, right? Agility is only, the business is only as agile as their, agile teams or the agile processes that they are putting in together.
Can I ask a question here?
Yep.
Hi, it's Goran.
Hey,
So I
Goran.
think just wondering around what you're saying, like every organization measures differently. So what I'm seeing a lot is, agile is a trend.
Right.
So I think, some kind, I often see KPIs coming in, like from in big corporations from another country, from the owner or someone, you have to be agile. And, the KPIs for that are often, I mean, they hide it sometimes, but often it's just like a number of agile teams that they are standing up in the morning for 15 minutes and then sitting down,
Right.
things like that. So it's there's a lot of agile, quote mark agile happening.
Right.
And I'm just interested in your take. What do you see, like from your own experience? What's the dark side of that? Like measurements that are really measuring the wrong things, and then being really presented as agile. Then that has an impact on people. It has an impact on a lot of things inside the company. And people start hating even agile because they think that is agile what they're going through, and it is not. So just and it's a general question, but just wondering around your experience in that.
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because when I talk to the senior management teams or people, one of the things that they tell us typically right off the bat is, I don't want to hear the word agile, right? Because they are sick and tired of hearing that word. The problem is it's the agile the word agile has become very commoditized, right? Everybody is using the word, whether it's to gain some uh, to gain some cloud, basically, in order to use the word, but there's nothing substantial in that. What's substantial is basically any company which actually is looking at the metrics published by some big report that was brought in by some research company or some companies who put together research on KPIs. Those KPIs and those metrics are only good for a certain scenario, or us, or the organizations who are actually following and have practiced agility at some point or in some manner, right? But as a company, if you are trying to implement agility within your organization, you probably need to look at your own scale. That's what I mentioned earlier, is that what is the definition of agility within your organization? where do you want to be agile, right? What are the operating processes that are currently not working for you, where you are not able to serve your customers better, bring some productivity, and the feedback loop is actually lagging. And this is not just to do with the technology. I'm talking about the business as a whole. And where do you think you can make some strides, where you can cut some those really long and tedious processes which have been developed over the years, that is reflecting on outputs but not reflecting anything on the outcomes, right? So building an outcome based model, building a value created model for your customers who you are actually serving, and building basically a team which is collaborative, empowered, and we're able to produce something of more meaningful and with happiness. I was talking to somebody a few months ago, and we talked about something called happiness index. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the team's happiness index is directly correlated to the outcomes and the key results that are generated through the team by working in a very cohesive and collaborative manner, right? If the team is not happy, then obviously you will not be able to, you know, gain that sort of agility that you're looking for within your organization, right? So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a complicated process. It is a process which is, you have to take your senior management and leadership basically through, in making them understand what truly agile organization means. It's not about agile, it's not about Scrum. It's about agility in general, which actually has to be brought in within the organization itself. You can hire a consultant from outside, and they can give you a spiel of how they would come in and do the transformation within an organization. But if the organization internally is not ready, and nobody's ready to buy in, and nobody's ready to understand the mindset and bringing that capability within themselves, it's you'll be just throwing away your money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's I think there's a business agility and team agility can be really
Right,
different stories
right.
inside a company, and then they get mixed up.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if one a couple of teams are doing Scrum, again, are we measuring the value? Why are we here as an organization? Maybe they're just producing rubbish,
Right.
in an iterative way.
Yeah.
I like what you said about this happiness index. I mean, I've seen. I think that's one of the things that you really can measure. I know,
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, whatever you call it. How would you recommend working in this company to a friend? The index like that, because I
Yeah.
think it somehow looks at how it is to work there, and then you can talk about engagement and things like that. I think this really helps. On the other hand, I think what is also, like what you said, different measurements. I think one of the things that why it's hard to measure, because I think even before Agile, companies are not measuring the right things. Time to market, really, really measured in a good way, or things like that. And then they come, how do we measure the Agile? Well, what have you been measuring before, so you can compare. And
Right.
it's also a thing. Yeah, thanks for the overview.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I mean, the happiness index is an interesting concept. You can find a lot of information on Google and also on Scrum. I think there's some information available on scrum.org. But the idea is that whenever you're doing your retrospectives, you actually go around the team whenever you actually getting your the what's working out, what's not working out, or your fist of five. However you're doing your retrospectives, right? You're looking at how the team actually, as an individual and as a team, they are actually experiencing things, right, within the within the working itself, right? And whether they actually rate on a scale of 1 to 5, or in t-shirt sizes, whatever, that becomes a sort of happiness index for your team. And then you set up some rules around that. And I think one of the things which we'll be doing today is actually to look at a different perspective of ways of working. And we'll get to that in the second part. But those are the things that companies typically, as a team, you can look at your happiness index, right? And so, all right, so any more questions?
No, just one also comment, interestingly enough, Scrum.org is coming up with the evidence-based management as generally a guide and sort of attempt to codify precisely what do we measure and how do we measure it. I just dropped the link for all interested.
Right. All right. So keeping this agility story in mind, right? And what we have to see when we actually look at the leadership, we typically see them as somebody who is going to direct, right? Somebody who is going to plan, and somebody who is going to do the control, right? And because we actually follow the principle of basically the late 19th century and early 20th century, we see basically people as machines, right? And they are brought into the organization to bring certain amount of certainty and to bring some control and bring an authority of working, right? Um, so this is the principle. Basically, there's an interesting concept which actually we talk about sometimes. There are two kinds of theories, theory X and theory Y. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Anybody heard of theory X and theory Y?
No.
So back in the day, in the early 1940s and 1950s, I believe, the principle was, I'm just not getting the name of the guy. It's skipping my mind. Anyway, it'll come to me. So he developed a theory, two theories, basically, theory X and theory Y. So theory X talks about carrot and stick principle. You give a carrot if you're doing good to your teams. And if they're not doing good, then you give them a stick. Means you reprimand them or you punish them. So this goes based on the idea that everybody who is working in a company doesn't really want to work. They are lazy. They need to be directed. They need to be controlled. They need to be told what to do, right? And they need to make sure that things are happening and things are in order. That's the idea of theory X. So that's why we have managers. That's why we have people who are looking into the team as a management team. And there are managers of managers who are looking at managers, whether the manager is doing the job of managing the other people. And then you have on top of that more managers managing other managers. So that's how the hierarchy comes from. So that's the idea of theory X. The theory Y is actually is the complete opposite of theory X, and it talks about people actually have an intrinsic motivation to do good. They really want to work. They want to prove something, right? They like to collaborate. They like to work together, or they also work independently with their own ideas, and people are creative in nature, right? And we should reward people based on the creativity and also the outcomes that they're producing, as opposed to just producing the outputs. So these theory X and theory Y. So obviously the agility part of theory would be more leaning towards theory Y, and obviously the manage and control, the typical management style of doing either project management or control management, is basically part of your theory X, right? But in last 20, 30 years, things have started to shift towards theory Y. Companies have seen like how they have performed well with when they actually give the teams what they really want, and let them do their work, right? And we are seeing now with what's happening with last 4 or 5 months, or in the last 6 months, how organizations are starting to evolve, and they're letting people do their thing, not just controlling them through Zoom or whatever you call it, but they are seeing increase in productivity. I was talking to this one big software company based in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago, and surprisingly they had a town hall, which was actually a town hall which was done over obviously virtual, and surprisingly the senior management actually was happily surprised to see that their teams were at least 18 to 22% more productive than they were 6 months ago. And why? Right? Because they let the teams do their job. They are making them do, they're not making them do and telling things, but they are actually making sure that the teams are collaborating, whatever they can collaborate on, or whatever, however they collaborate on, but they are actually getting results produced, right? People are focused, nobody's getting bothered. And to me, I mean, when I look at the typical organization office, you actually have a lot of distractions. You know, there's a commute time. If I'm in New York and I'm going to work, it typically takes me about 1.5 hours to um, 2 hours. Like when I was working in New York and Manhattan, my commute time was 2 hour one way. Right? I'll be in Montenegro here if I was taking a 2 hour commute time. But in certain ways, what organizations are looking at, how they can, empower their own people to bring the leadership within the agile organization. And this leadership is not with the titles, but this leadership exists between the teams and how they are collaborating and how the work is getting accomplished, right? So those are the things. I mean, there's a good book that you should read, which is called Drive 2.0 by Dan Pink. It's about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So how the autonomy, mastery, and purpose are important to teams and individuals, because they want to be autonomous, they want to master something, right? And then that's how the results are produced. And there's also an interesting video. I can send that link to everyone now after this, or when this is over. So when we talk about organization as living organisms, we typically are looking at how the organizations are basically using the analogy of a garden, right? We want a leader to be a gardener. We want to be a leader to be a nurturer, right? He or she should be a creative guide and a steward who is actually nurturing the roles and variety of relations within the organization, and which means the different parts of the garden, right? And as a gardener, basically, they have to pay attention to creating the fertility of the soil that they are, putting stuff in, and making sure that the environment that they are building around them is basically focused on growth, enablement, and brings a creativity for people to flourish, right? So those are the key parts of, like, that's sort of an analogy when we are talking about from a agile organization and what a leader and a leadership within agile organizations mean, right? So keeping that in mind, this is an interesting quote from one of the chief operating officer of the ING Netherlands, right? So what he typically is talking about, he's saying that culture is perhaps the most important element of this sort of change effort. And they have spent an enormous amount of time and energy and leadership trying to role model a sort of behavior, which is ownership, empowerment, customer centricity. And that is inappropriate in an agile culture, right? So culture plays a very, very important role, right? And so does the team and everything we talked about earlier, right? So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And any questions so far? Are you guys still there?
Alive and kicking.
All right, good.
Yeah.
If it is too much information, please tell me. This is actually the Jamboard. I've sent you a link. Everyone posted a link on the chat, which is a Jamboard. And I see a lot of penguins, alligators. What is a capybara? Crocodile, alligator. All right, cool.
Capybara, the biggest actually rodent. You wouldn't believe it. It's
Really?
like, Yeah, it's guinea pig on steroids, basically.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, I didn't know that. Thank you. All right. So what we have here is uh, on this. Everybody can see it, right? So let's first do an experiment of whether you actually are able to create a sticky note. That's important. Can everyone try to see if they are able to use the sticky notes or create a sticky note?
It seems access is required.
Access is required, yes. So I did not share it properly. I only gave you the viewer access. I have to give you the editor access. All right, here we go. Okay, if you refresh your page, probably it should work. Oh, perfect. Somebody created a sticky. Thank you. Hello, test. All right, right. Just don't create anything right now. So this is an interesting expectations board, right? And what I'm looking at is basically you have, I only have three roles here, but you can at least add two more if you want, whatever you feel like adding to this role, to roles, whatever roles you would like to see. So the first one is product owner team. So and on the x-axis we have who we expect something from each of these roles, right? And what sort of expectation that person, a specific person, if you are an agile coach, if you are a team member, or if you are a product owner, or even if you're a scrum master, like what do you expect in that role from each of these roles, basically, right? So what I'll do is I'll give you guys. So the first activity is add stickies. And in the add stickies box, what you're doing is basically writing one responsibility on each sticky you expect for each role. You need to decide which role you are taking. And then you need to put your card basically on any of the boxes that you're expecting something from. And I'll give you guys 12 minutes to do this exercise. And if you are assuming a role for yourself, please let me know, and I can actually add that piece here under the role using a pen. I believe I can cut this role out, these two, and you can tell me what role you would like to see. Anyone? Well, any role that you would like to see apart from product owner, team, agile coach, a scrum master maybe?
Yes, Scrum Master. Mhm.
Okay. My handwriting is very bad, even on the screen. Okay, Scrum Master. Okay, what is the next one?
Maybe business analyst, because between the business analyst and product owner is
Yeah.
a tiny, slightly difference. So who
It's
is?
always sandwiched.
Yes, yes.
All right, that's a good point. All right, so we have two roles there. Okay, so I'll give you guys 12 minutes, and I will start my timer. I'll start my timer right now. All right, perfect. Is everyone done?
Done.
Okay, we got 30 seconds left, so all right. Good. Let's look at the board here. Somebody put the card upside down. I'm gonna delete this card. I'm assuming that this is actually in this section. All right. So so if you read this based on your reading, what do you make out of this? Like, is it matching your expectation that's your reality, or is it way far off? So if I have to see, as a product owner, I'm expecting from the product owner prioritizing the backlog, maximizing value, right? And I'm assuming this is actually between both product owner and the team, roadmap and timeline of the product. And from the team, as a product owner, I'm expecting cross-functional. Then I'm expecting from the coach to collaboration and more practical staff. What does that mean? Anybody who wrote that, can you explain that? And for the Scrum Master, product owner wants to know the status of the product and the team, and delegating work to the BA. Okay. In terms of team, guiding teams what needs to be implemented from the product owner, supporting the team with requirements and market data, which is true. High degree of collaboration between the product owner and the team. Self-organizing, cares about the product and give constructive ideas. Needs to coach. For the coach, they are looking to coach to organization how to implement agile approach and what does that mean. One-on-one meetups. Scrum best practices help when needed, removing the impediments, servant leadership, and facilitation for the Scrum Master. All right, so in terms of the reality check, right? How do you think we can align some of these based on the roles and what the
Well,
expectations
I have issue with delegate works with for BA role.
Yeah.
It's completely unrelated to me. I think that's for in Scrum, if you practice Scrum, delegation of work should not come from one person. I think that everyone has a Scrum team has to be self-organizing and so on. So delegating work, in my opinion, is not a good practice in Scrum.
Right.
I do feel like yes, there should be some guidance, for example, from Scrum Master in terms of reaching certain goals for the sprint and keeping the team on track with the commitment they gave for the sprint. But I don't feel like delegating work is something that the true implementation of the Scrum framework inside of the company should take a place. And yeah.
All right, that's a very good point. So can we take this out then and replace it with something that is more meaningful? Oops. What would that be? If you're looking from a product owner point of view, so what is the collaboration between the product owner and the BA? What is the expectation of the product owner from the BA? Not just delegating work, right? It has to be more meaningful and more senseful.
Maybe giving feedback of certain features, if they make sense or how they fit together with different other parts of the product. I don't know.
Yeah.
maybe filling the gaps between, in the sense of functionality, between the product owner and business analyst, in the sense that business analyst maybe support and provide more details, but at the same time, on the other hand, they would have the two roles which have the matching kind of role. So both of them are dedicated for functionality. So yeah, I don't know. I also confused with BA role in the whole Agile Scrum concept.
Right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, so the concept of typically in my, I mean, I'll share my example. I've worked with some large, companies in North America and Europe. So from my experience, typically business analysts are either doing the role of a quasi or a proxy product owner. Because typically business analysts who are coming, let's say, for example, when I was working for a large financial institution, and when looking at that example, we actually had a lot of business analysts, right? But we also had product owners who actually were product owners because they were relationship managers. Their actual title was relationship manager because they were customer relationship manager of something or the other, right? So for example, if I take asset management, then those people were actually the asset management, relationship manager, because they are looking at the customer, they're talking to them on a daily basis, and they're trying to solve their problems. Now those people were made the product owner, but they literally didn't have any time to spend with the team doing the product management job, right? So what they did was they also had product business analysts who were experienced in terms of the application of the system itself, who had been working with the system for many years, and who had in-depth knowledge, just like the product manager, in terms of the business rules, the process within the system, and how the business is conducted from a business perspective. So those guys were business analysts, and they were liaisoning between the business, which was the product person, or the business stakeholders, and the technology team, who were actually developing the product. So the idea around those kind of business analysts was they were made proxy or the quasi product owners. But the challenge with that, what happens is when the things get very complicated within the building the system or building the product, it becomes complicated from a perspective where the decisions have to be made. Then in those cases and circumstances, the quasi product owner and or the proxy product owner is kind of useless because they are powerless, because they don't have the power and authority to make a decision for the product itself, because they are just liaisoning between the product as well as the technology, right? So having business analyst is basically not a bad idea. And I have a lot of respect for business analysts because they actually do a lot of work in terms of getting the product to a state where it should be or can be. But at the same time, when they are not empowered to make decisions, the team actually is sometimes left in limbo, right? And the team actually waits on the decision of if certain feature or certain component has to be built or changed or modified or deleted even. Then they cannot make that decision unless the product owner, the real product owner, is involved, right? So in those cases, the expectation from the product owner would be to have the business analyst basically either work in liaison or in parallel with the product owner. And what the expectation for the product owner would be that they are collaborating more often than not, right? So there's a linkage between collaboration. So, I mean, I think instead of delegating work, I could probably say more collaborative work. And this actually will probably be going in two places, which means it will be going here, right? Plus also from the BA perspective to the product owner, it'll be going here as well, right? Oh, sorry. Um, does anyone disagree or has any other input to that?
Yeah, I have one question, but I agree with you. It makes sense. But who is then maybe more dedicated for collaboration with customers? I guess product owner, but also a BA needs to sometimes to gather also feedback and requirements from stakeholders.
Yeah. So when I talk about more collaborative work, we are typically talking about that they are in unison in terms of whether they are going to a customer meeting or they are presenting to the customer a demo or they are getting some feedback from the customer directly. In all those cases, product owner and the business analyst are actually in unison that they are presenting jointly together, right? So this takes away the issues around the idea of guessing work, that business analyst doesn't know that what were the real questions that were asked from the stakeholders, right? And product owner also knows that they don't have to explain twice or three times back and take that information back. And this way, the load of work which is actually shared is not that heavy. Otherwise, you are doing double the job of going to the customer meeting without the business analyst, and then coming back from the customer meeting and telling the business analyst again, and sometimes information get lost, right? So in order to avoid those scenarios, that's one of the things that we did was we actually paired them up, and whenever we actually had a large session, either a feedback session or sort of a survey that we were running, or we were doing some study with the team, then we were making sure that this is actually happening in unison. Make sense?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, but it also depends on the companies, basically how much they are able to execute that, right? Again, it comes back to the leadership, whether they are willing to do that or not. So looking at the guiding the team, what needs to be implemented, team based. Under the team, is there anything that you guys see which you would like to see change or not correctly interpreted? Oops. I would like to in particular talk about this one, which says it cares about the team, and team's expectation from the team is that cares about the product and give constructive ideas. Is this in the wrong place, or somebody can explain, whoever created this?
Yeah, I can explain.
Okay.
I think that the best team is the team that really is dedicated to that likes the product they are building actually, and giving constructive ideas, meaning negotiating during the plannings and giving more inputs to the product owner in terms of how certain stories are being conducted. I understand that not in many organizations there is room for doing this, but from my perspective, the team that really speaks during the planning meetings, that the team that is not shy or is doing just what it's told to, is not a good team, but actually the team that cares about the product, the team that knows the product, so team can give more inputs and not to be shy to give certain points to the product ownership, send back the stories and stuff like that during the planning meetings.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's a good point. Yes, I agree with you. It's basically what, in other words, I would say challenging the status quo, making sure that they feel engaged and involved, right? That's the base idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. um, so rest of the things are pretty standard, which I'm looking at. Anything you see off the mark here? This is an interesting question somebody put under the Scrum Master expectation from the Agile coach. Is Agile coach just an overpriced Scrum Master? That's a very good point. Do we really need Agile coaches? That's a question which I will ask.
And if I may extend the question, if we
Sure.
do we need them internal or external? Is it better to build up capability or to hire somebody with a proven track?
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, I mean, in my experience, I think the best Agile coaches are basically really good Scrum Masters who have the pulse of the team, also have the pulse of the company, organization, and the ways of working within the organization, right? External consultants always come out and give you a set of rules. They look at the teams, they provide their own insights. But as we don't have all fingers the same on our hands, right? So the Agile coaching is coaching is basically is more about listening and finding solution within the team itself rather than a coach telling you what to do, right? And so yes, the best Agile coaches actually come from the team itself. Either they are the team leads or they are the Scrum Masters or they are business analysts or product owners, right? And that's how it should be driven. Bringing somebody from the outside is basically can work, from setting up the process, setting up the structure and facade and whatever you need to do. But the internal doings and internal working and collaboration within the team is more important than anything else, right? So yes, this question is, what did they expect? So it's not really an expectation, it's sort of challenging. I don't know if I want to keep it there, but we can keep something similar, which is more related to this idea of internal or external Agile coach, right? What they expect from that, whether the Agile coach truly understands the workings of the team, and the workings of the organization, and understands the landscape, what they are, basically, because culture plays a lot of a big part. Help me reflect on my mindset, behavior, practices, knowledge. Is Scrum Master just an underpriced Agile coach? Well, that's another question which is analogous to this one. It is a good point. I'm not sure like it is underpaid or overpaid, but my in my understanding, Scrum Master basically is Agile coach is and should be a Scrum Master as well. One-on-one meetups. Can someone explain what does that mean? One-on-one meetups mean having a one-on-one meetup with the Scrum Master and the Agile coach for coaching or for mentoring. Is that the point? No one? Okay. I would assume that this is basically between the Scrum Master and the Agile coach. Remove barriers. Who are you expecting to remove the barrier for? Is the Scrum Master removing the barrier for themselves or something else?
Well, that should be probably moved to Scrum Master team relationship.
Right. Anybody else? Okay, and the community of practice. Is this community of practice between everything, or is just between the Scrum Master and the Agile coach and the Scrum Master, or the Scrum Master community of practice?
Originally, I said it there as basically Agile coaches and Scrum Masters should definitely have a sort of studio or community to support them, to support each other internal.
Yeah. Yeah, typically what I have seen happening is, if you are running a large transformation or sort of an agile journey, if the organization is on or the teams are on, then a community of practice definitely makes sense. And we have set up in the past a community of practice specifically for Scrum Masters, for the product owners, for the developers, and also for the line managers. I don't know what do you call them here, line managers or the managers in general. The idea behind that is that we meet, typically meet once a week. We talk about different topics. We created a book club. We bring in different ideas into those community of practice meetings or sessions, I would call them. Like these were learning sessions basically. And the idea is that we pick up a topic every week where we want to talk about based on the previous feedback from our different retrospectives, and talk about those those scenarios and those challenges, and read about them and learn about them, so that we actually build a culture of continuous learning and apply them into our own teams when we go out of it, right? The reason for line managers or the managers was because line managers typically have a habit, who are not part of the Scrum team, getting into this micromanagement mode, because they want to know each and every activity. When are you walking, sneezing, coughing, and whatever is happening within the team, because they typically do not attend the stand-ups, or not allowed to attend the stand-ups, and then they only get to see the workable thing basically every week or every other week, depending on how long the sprints are. Right, so there's a tendency between line managers, who are typically managing the revocation and other things for people who are working for them, to know and understand. So they generally develop a lot of bad habits in terms of micromanagement and watching over people's shoulder and trying to find out what's happening. But so the community of practice for them was important one, because making them understand the ways of working is important, and how things actually take place. Those sort of things. So what did we learn from this whole exercise?
Well, we at least now have some sort of framework that we decided on what are the expected behaviors.
Right. I mean, you can very well experiment this with your current teams, right? If you are basically part of the team, and whenever you have your retrospective or your planning session, maybe you need to do some sort of a reset to see like how things will work. It's a very helpful tool. I will send a PDF version of this basically. But the idea is that we want to get some sort of clarity among the expectations, the roles and responsibilities, as well as what each others are expecting as a team from each other, right? All right, so I'll stop sharing this. Any other comment on this exercise that we did?
No, thank you.
All right. Okay. I actually didn't realize the time is running pretty fast here right now. So as part of our Agile leadership, one of the things that we focus on is how to build basically an Agile mindset. Has anyone heard of Agile mindset?
Yeah.
Right. So before we make the organization agile, we need to focus on ourselves as individuals, like how we actually transform ourselves, right? And there are few things around around transforming ourselves within agile that we typically focus on. Is how do we go from a reactive state to a creative state of mind, right? And typically what it refers to is how we actually contextually adjust our mindset, right? It's not an easy task to do, but developing the inner agility is very essential uh, in basically making sure that we can lead within the team, as well as lead ourselves through that journey, right? And when we talk about the organizations in general, basically, their mindset has to be from reactive to a creative state. So reactive means things are happening. Obviously, you're always reacting, and many organizations actually work in that mode. They're always reactive, right? Something is always happening. There's always some sort of severity 1, 2 stuff is always going on. And that takes up most of the time from productivity for the teams in terms of thinking something new. They're always focusing on, when we talk about innovation, we actually have 3 different horizons, and within the horizon 1, 2, and 3. And typically, and most importantly, most of the organizations spend their time in horizon 1, which is in the now, which is now, or maybe 6 months or 1 year, right? They're always focused on that because there's so many fires burning all the time, and those fires have to be somehow put out. And usually, typically, organizations are sucked into that thinking of in horizon 1. And when we talk about creative or self-authoring, right, mindset, basically we are looking at how we can, from the inside out, we can experience based on creating a reality of things, right, and tapping into the passion and the purpose that has to be built within the organization or within the team, right? And when we talk about being creative, is basically expanding and bringing our perspective with a focus on positivity and experience, where we, as a team, are able to enjoy working, have fun and have a flow of work that actually is flowing within the organization or within the teams and within the ways of working, right? And when we talk about a typical organization, we see that most of the organizations spend mostly in their reactive mode, right? As we talked about earlier, right? So we need to critically foster basically innovation, build a culture of innovation, right? And bring also collaboration into the workplace, and the value creation piece, which we talked about earlier, which is actually at the heart of agile organizations, right? Coming from certainty to discovery, finding out from being authoritative to building a culture of partnership, and from having a scarcity of resources or scarcity of things, to having abundance of those things, right? When I say resources, I don't mean people. I actually mean resources, because people are not resources, right? Most of the companies actually have to tell them most of the times, especially if somebody is from human resources here. They typically talk in terms of resources, and people are not resources, right? How do we foster the innovation, right? And in order to build the innovation, fostering the innovation, uh, a typical organization is setting up a budget for the whole year, and those budgets basically are planned, sometimes a year or 2 years in advance, right? And everything needs to be spent within that year itself, right? And what happens in this mindset is that if there is an emergent opportunity that is existing, we do not seize that opportunity, right? And if something unexpectedly comes new, hey, we cannot do that because we don't have budget for that. and then that opportunity is sort of lost, right? So we make mistakes based on how the organization itself is structured, where there's no innovation fostering culture, built into the organization itself, right? And where a copycat culture, where we are making the same mistakes over and over again, happens, right? And when we talk about from a creative mindset and how we can foster the innovation has to be encouraged within the organization, from a leadership perspective, from a team perspective, right? And one of the things, a few things that we talk about in fostering innovation are related to experimentation, continuous testing, not technology part, but continuous testing of experimentation, and learning through that experimentation, right? Making mistakes, but at the same time, learning from it and getting better at it, right? Um, it's not a small activity, right? And the focus is more on the execution of the strategy for innovation, rather than just working through it, right? Again, outcome based, basically, so that the leaders who are executing for it are helping the teams build and innovate. right? So some of the personal practices that we look at from innovation and creative mindset is we look at how we can pause and create a space for clear judgment, right? Rather than doing it and making mistakes continually, right? How we can go back to the original thinking, that why we're doing this in the first place, and what are the things that we can do differently, and build a purposeful action, around that. Embracing the ignorance, basically, which basically means listen more, think more, right? And if it is clear to the team and an individual as well, then from a place of not knowing what things that you don't know, what the original idea or the unexpected that happens, or any breakthrough that might different ideas that are brought onto the table by different people within the organization or the teams, that they needs to be listened to and think and thought about those and then applied, right? Reframing the questions, which means using a different technique to change the nature of the question itself, right? We should be asking ourselves that and blocking our mental model. Like, we sometimes we are stuck in a mental model that things won't happen this way or things have to happen that way, right? But if we break through that mental model and we reframe the questions differently, right, and ask ourselves that how we can unblock and unlock that problem, then things actually start looking at more from a more creative mindset perspective, right? You need to set a direction, not a destination, right? So Agile is a journey. Basically, there's no destination, but it's a direction that we are moving towards, right? And in the VUCA world, which we talk about, we look at, instead of moving to a fixed goal, right? As a team and as individuals, we need to be on a journey which has a clear direction, that whatever we are solving, wherever we want to be, but we are actually bringing the perspective of, having a direction that we are headed in the right direction, and testing continually, right? The solutions that we are building, and also ourselves as individuals, basically, right? If we are experimenting, then how we can avert major costly disasters, basically, right? And thinking ourselves as something that we are experimenting with every sprint, every release, or every business outcome that we are generating, and through different innovative ways, right? That will make things more exciting and not terrifying, because then you can see the feedback, right? Plan, do, check, act. Like every time you're doing something, you're experimenting, you're seeing the results, you're getting the feedback, and then moving forward, right? So that's continually testing your solutions and ourselves as well, whether we are progressing, whether we're not progressing. Do not relate this to the metrics. It's nothing to do with the metrics, but it's something to do with the outcomes that are being produced, right? Fostering a culture of collaboration. How can we foster a culture of collaboration? That is an important piece, because from a traditional organization perspective, we have silos, right? We have hierarchies, we have silos, and we also have sort of a reactive mindset, right? And that brings a lot of authority. And then the relationship between people who are doing the work and people who are actually the leaders becomes very sort of some sort of superiority to the subordination, right? And people who are down the ladder are basically sometimes wish that if they were in that position, they would be able to make better decisions, and so on and so on forth, right? So if we build a culture for collaboration, right, and fostering collaboration within an organization, is basically going back to the point of building a network, right? A network of teams which are autonomous, which are empowered, right? And building a creative mindset with partnerships and by agreement, all right? And so the leadership from that point of view should be able to help teams in making sure that there is an expertise that is put in place, creating the conditions basically where teams are more effective, right? And they actually remove those silos that typically exist in traditional organizations, right? And the idea around the mind of partnership, when we talk about, is basically asking a simple question like, who can I help and who can help me? That sort of thing, right? Partnership is not just about listening or trusting and collaborating, but it is also it's also being able to make sure that we are owning, there's some sort of ownership, and we are not influencing the wrong things, but bringing that collaboration into the team and through partnership so that it's more, more better. Any questions so far? All right, so going back to the value creation, as part of your agile mindset, basically when we actually look at how we continually evolve and rapidly grow, right, through the VUCA world that we live in, right, and how the market and the business conditions change continually, and the idea of value creation comes from the fact that we want to build a mindset of basically where we have more of the customer in place in our minds, where we are having some sort of customer centricity, building a culture of intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship, right? Co-creating something, and also looking at how we can be more inclusive than exclusive when we talk about with the teams, right? Building a win-win option situation and delivering value simultaneously to all the stakeholders, right? So going away from the reactive mindset of everything that we talked about earlier, right, where we can lose the sight of opportunities. But three things that comes to my mind when we talk about fostering the value creation, and those are looking at how we can look outward and forward. How can we unleash the potential of people and the organization, right? And how we can discover and build partnerships, right? The last one here for the mindset is basically building a disciplined approach, which basically is through discovery, right? And asking more questions, from a perspective where we are listening more deeply with the focus of what we might be missing and what are the things that we can do better, right? Building a space for people and individuals and teams where they are pausing and reflecting, of making sure that the discovery is happening. From a partnership point of view, we are looking at how we can take the responsibility, like building the sense of ownership, right, which is very, very important. And expectations and roles have to be clarified. What happens, where it happens. So typically in organizations, when I go, we actually create a team working agreement. I don't know if you ever have done, or some of you might have done it, but has anyone done any sort of team working agreement before?
Of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you find them helpful or were they effective?
I cannot judge effectiveness, but at least helpfulness.
Right.
And that's
So, yeah. And always, and as part of your building the disciplined approach, we're looking at how we can apply actions such as, identifying opportunities and sifting through things that were not fruitful or were not successful, right? And how we can provide more value to attract the resources that we need, right? Again, resources, not people. And building some win-win outcomes based on contribution and co-creation, right? In a nutshell, what we're looking at is basically, sorry, going back to the same point of not done that. We are looking at how we can change ourselves first, and then we can think about the organization. Because if we don't have that change within ourselves, if we're not thinking and acting differently through building an agile mindset, then we won't be able to transform or change the organization, right? When you have to be reactive, that depends on circumstances, but and when you have to be creative. It's basically, again, that culture has to be built in within the organization, right? And some discipline practices that I just talked about. So any questions on this? Did we lose everyone? No, we have some questions.
I suppose everybody is in read-only mode currently.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I had another exercise actually, so I don't know if we have time for that, since it's already 8:45. Looks like your time.
Well, we are nearing the time box, but it's always up to a group to decide. So, and however you feel like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I will leave up to the group to decide basically what they would like to do.
Maybe you can talk more about topics on your agenda, and if we have a time, then maybe we can do exercise. If everyone else agree.
Sure. I only have one last slide actually. Okay, I'll just go back to my slide then. All right, can anyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So when we talk about building the agile teams, and this is part of inspiring the greatness within the teams and building those teams, they are working in new ways, right? What we are essentially saying is that we want to help teams work in new ways, right? So from that point of view, we look at how leaders should learn how to build the teams, right? Teams which are diverse, teams which are empowered, teams which are connected, right? And teams which are small, right? And they should be dynamic, they should be high performing teams, right? And they organize basically as an independent unit of agility, right? So that's the idea behind the new working ways. So this includes basically having a multidisciplinary team that can break down different silos, right? They are self-managed or sort of monodisciplinary, to which is actually focused on providing, focused on getting the outcomes, not just the outputs, and there is a definite flow of work, right, to get things done. If there's no flow of work to get things done, then the team is not very effective, right? That actually creates a lot of problem. And it doesn't have to be a functional boss when we talk about working in new ways, but the expertise and the knowledge of the organization has to be there from all members of the team, so that they can co-create and build that dynamic capability, which goes beyond the teams itself, but also it lives and breathes within the team itself, right? And the encouragement of teams to work in different cycles, probably most likely the rapid cycles, which is focused and geared towards building greater value, basically, which gives effectiveness, which brings effectiveness, and which brings the working ways, from tasks through prioritization of things within the teams itself. Design thinking. Anybody heard of design thinking?
Yes.
That's great. Anybody heard of business model innovation, or the lean canvas, or the business model canvas?
We've got the yes in chat. Yes, also on my side.
All right, good. So, well, design thinking is a powerful approach where we develop innovative solutions, right? We build different business models and systems, right? And the the idea around design thinking is basically bringing the customer experience at every stage of the journey with the customer, or the customer journey that we typically call, right? And we use customer journey maps. We build and explore agile teams in terms of needs, what the customer really wants, their needs for product and service, their needs to discover, learn, and evaluate, test, and buy, right? They need to use, maintain, and enhance basically the services and the products that we're building for them, right? And identification and alignment, and the purpose, which is basically done as part of the design thinking, right? It drives basically a large frame of ideas, and what we are looking at, ideas which are bring sort of divergent thinking in terms of how different convergent thinking pieces come together. The testing is important as part of the design thinking phase, how you're doing the selection, pre-selection, post-selection, how you're actually building options based on the feedback that are being built, right? And when we talk about business in general, from a business model innovation point of view, we are looking at how we actually are building a value creating unit, right? Which we call as business, right? And so the business model innovation basically is to pursue the business itself, right? And the customers obviously has to be at the center of it. So different innovative products offerings that have to be developed, the idea around the business model innovation, which typically is not just part of the business model canvas, which we typically heard of, but it's the key elements of the model itself, and how all the elements can deliver the value to the customer and the stakeholders, right? The value creation is basically building the model through where everyone who is involved and participating is a winner, right? And everyone actually benefits from it. A good example of that is, in the modern day and age, Airbnb is a very good example, right? Which basically looking at people who are first of all looking for places to stay, and then there are people who actually are looking to rent the unused space, right? So it's a win-win situation for both kinds of people. I have a spare room which I want to rent, right? Somebody who wants a spare room to rent while they're traveling, right? So this is a two-way transaction which they can do very easily with each other, right? Same thing with Uber as well. I have a car which I can use to something, and I have spare time where I can pick up people and drop them. I need a ride, and I don't really want a taxi. Then how does that work, right? So this whole idea around the modern day businesses, which actually is solving that innovative problem, which actually is a really good example. Any other examples you can think of? Cargo, which again is based on the idea of Uber itself.
Well, or all the Craigslist type of things where it's directly connecting people to people.
Right. Yeah. You have a different name for that here. I forgot the name.
Hey, it's Goran again. I have a question regarding this. So I think this is like how we build agile teams. It's a list of things you might do at any point in time, But I'm wondering on your personal take, or like a bit of a case study or something, because you said it in one sentence. I think it's really important. It's about teaching, I don't know which word you use, but like teaching leaders to do this. I think this is about leadership development, leadership enablement. It's where agile transformations can really fail or really pass. Maybe what's your view on that? Maybe what's your favorite approach on this capacity building in the leadership?
Well, if you are talking about capacity building within the leadership, we are looking at how what are the gaps, right? Which typically leadership does not agree to sometimes are existing, and what are the things that they are seeing where they are not progressing, right? So I talked about earlier in terms of things that the through design thinking or through the more business model innovation, what the leaders need to do. And one of the things which I have seen working is basically when we go through the transformation, a few of my previous customers or clients I've worked with, we have actually gone through a phase where, oops, sorry, I think I touched something, where we have gone through the phase of first making education as a top priority. What I mean by that is looking at the top level layer of getting their buy-in. In order to get their buy-in, get their leadership transformed through the teams, is making sure that they are educated about what changes they want to see, they would like to see, and what changes are coming because of that, right? So in order to address those pieces, the education is the first part, and education of the senior management, including the CEO or whoever the head honcho of the company is making sure that that person, that layer is actually educated. Once they are educated, they can make their own sane and wise decision in terms of what and how they need to structure, right? And then we come to the second layer, and also the layer which actually is the working teams, which actually have to go through that phase of education. So education is the first phase which we look at, and that's how the culture is built. And it's not built within a day. A typical transformation is a bad word, but typical transformation takes somewhere between 18 months to 36 months. Sometimes it might take up to 7 to 10 years, right? So an organization which is 150 years old or 100 years old, they have people working with an average experience within the company for about 25-30 years. It's really hard to change that culture, which actually is already embedded and built. They've been doing things differently. They have been doing things their own way. They have created this red tape of processes and crisscross of silos, basically, which are existing, and really hard to move a piece of paper from one department to the other, right? I mean, if you look at an example of government organizations, typically even some other organizations which are not non-governmental, but they actually act as they are government organizations, it's really hard to change and bring those changes about. And that cannot happen from the teams itself, but that has to happen from the top layer. And that's why we talk about leadership and are making them understand the new ways of working and what changes are coming so they can prepare themselves. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. I think education is the first point, and the thing you said comes afterwards. They're capable of making sane decisions. I would say no. I mean, it's what you said afterwards. It takes really months and even years for them to understand really what does that education mean. So
Right.
I think this is one of the hardest parts of any transformation.
Right. I mean, I'll give you an example of a company which is basically about 125 years old company based out of US, and their average age of person who's working there is about 48 years old. They actually are working in that company. Some people are working in that company for 30 years, and what they have typically looked at is they were pioneers back in the day in the 70s and 80s in many things, right? But they sat down. They thought, well, we have enough customers, we have enough cash in the bank, really don't have to worry about where the industry is going. But they have been overtaken by many different companies which came with a new model and with the innovative model of doing business in their own sector, in the industry that they work in. And they have been dwindling for the past few years, at least for the past decade, right? Now in today's state, they actually have started realizing that, if we do not act now, then we will be extinct in the next 5 years. So how can we save ourselves, right? So there are still people in that organization, even though they have been on this agile journey for the last 2.5 years. There are still people in the organizations who do not want to accept the fact that they are big and they're about to fail. And there are other people who are actually have learned that lesson and they are acting on it and they're transforming within their own business units, right? So those things and those kind of people are obviously in every other country and every other major industry in which some big companies are there who actually have not learned their lessons yet. So it's up to their peril basically whether they take those lessons and apply them. If they don't, then obviously they'll be, sooner or later they will be extinct, right? So they'll be gone from the map, and some other company will come in. And that's why Amazon is always Amazon is a big company, but at the same time they're always challenging themselves because they are always challenging. And one thing which Amazon is very scared of, Walmart, because Amazon and Walmart has, in the US especially, they have a huge tussle between the two organizations. And from an Amazon point of view, they will always want to be at the forefront of providing the customer the service, bringing the products in more innovatively, setting up their distribution channel. Walmart is another big behemoth of a retail store. They do have the same amount of, or maybe more in terms of distribution, because they have been embedded in the US market for the last 100 years, at least 75 years. So that makes a huge difference basically from that perspective, which is not really helpful, for companies to sit down and relax, but they should be at the forefront of it and always challenging themselves, right, of what is coming next. And that's how you survive in the VUCA world. All right. So just to wrap it up, I think we've taken a lot of time. I was not expecting to take a lot of time here, but so some takeaways basically are, how you can build an open, diverse, and empowered teams, right? And that encourages basically views and is bringing that change within the organization itself, right? How we can support working in rapid cycles and with different tasks that are happening within the organization, how we can create short bursts of work so that we have a frequent reflection of measure and learn, right? A continuous learning principles around that. And then how we can explore different opportunities and deploy design thinking and build a model of innovation within the organization itself, so we can focus on the customers and deliver some value. All right. Any more questions? So I will share some a few things basically, if not today, then probably tomorrow or by the end of this week, and send it to this group. And if you are looking at some basic Agile and Scrum principles, you can definitely go to our site basically, and there's a book or sort of a text which you can download for free. That might help you gaining some basic understanding on the Agile fundamentals and Scrum fundamentals. That'll help you quite a bit. And that's about it from my side.
Okay, and from my side, I would like to say thanks, Manoj, for a great informative talk. Personally, I enjoyed a lot, and we are mostly a read-only community, as you see, but I think that the people were quite interested and the conversation led us into reaching far longer than we expected. Some updates regarding Scrum Wednesdays. We decided that next week we'll do a pause, first time in 12 weeks. And After that, we'll continue. We still don't know if we'll continue in 1 or 2 week cadence. The idea is that I'm returning back to Belgrade. Boris is also having some personnel things to do. So at this point, we cannot make it next Wednesday. Anybody who wants to jump in can, but probably we'll do it in 2 weeks. So once again, thanks, Manoj. It was a great pleasure. Also, as you see, chat is starting to people are dropping in. Kudos. See you next week, and hopefully everybody had as much fun as I did. Bye.
All right. Well, thank you, guys.
Bye bye. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao.